Hello and welcome to my school channel. My name is Angela, and in this video we're going to continue the government topic by topic video lesson. So we're going to continue the topic military rule in Nigeria, but now we're moving to the second part of the video lesson where we'll discuss the second wave of military rule in Nigeria. So please stay with us, don't go anywhere, we'll be right back. Welcome back to my school channel. Like I said earlier, we're moving on to the second part of the topic military rule in Nigeria, where we'll discuss the second wave of military rule. So let's dive right into it. So just after the return to civilian rule that took place between 1979 and 1983 under the administration of Alhaji Shehu Shagari, Major General Muhammadu Buhari took over in the second wave. So after 4 years of civilian rule, Nigeria witnessed a return to military rule on December 31st, 1983, when the military overthrew the government of President Shehu Shagari. The coup was perpetrated by Major General Muhammadu Buhari, Major General Ibrahim Babangida, and Brigadier Sani Abacha, Brigadier Tunde Idiagbon, and others. So Major General Muhammadu Buhari, then the General Officer commanding the 3rd Armored Division in Jos, emerged as the head of state and commander-in-chief. So he had this position, and it was constantly undermining the authority of President Shehu Shagari at that time. So eventually he had the opportunity to perpetrate this coup, and so he took over power and became the commander-in-chief and head of state in Nigeria. So he was supported by senior officers including Brigadier Tunde Idiagbon, who became his chief of staff for the Supreme Headquarters, that is the deputy head of state. So what was the reason for Muhammadu Buhari taking over power from civilian rule? So one of the reasons was rampant corruption and electoral fraud in the 1983 general election. So the election that took place in 1983 that led Alhaji Shehu Shagari to earn a second term while in office was widely criticized for the electoral fraud that took place during the election. There was also a lot of corruption allegations against some of the government officials at that time. And so Muhammadu Buhari decided to take over in order to reduce the corruption and indiscipline that was going on in the Nigerian society. So there was also severe economic downturn due to the falling oil prices and mounting debt. So in the previous video lesson, we talked about the oil boom that took place in the 1970s and how because of the price of oil skyrocketed, the amount of revenue gained by the Nigerian government also skyrocketed. But we also understand that during times where there is oil boom, or in societies where there is oil boom, there's bound to be a decline in the economic situation within the country, because when the price of oil eventually falls, it will affect the economy in the sense that all the other sectors of the economy have not been developing for a very long time. And so because of that, when the price of oil eventually falls, the revenue will reduce as well, and there will be no opportunity to get some of this revenue from other sectors of the economy. So this is what happened in Nigeria at that time. And so because of the fall in oil prices, there was an economic downturn within the Nigerian society. And as a result of that, a lot of debt had to be incurred. They had to borrow money from international organizations such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. So there was also widespread public dissatisfaction with the civilian administration. They were not okay with the way the society was governed at the time. There were allegations of nepotism, mismanagement, and political violence. So these were the reasons that Muhammadu Buhari gave for the transition to military rule. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to talk about the structure of Major General Muhammadu Buhari's government. The Supreme Military Council was the ruling body. Buhari ruled with strict military discipline and placed emphasis on law, order, and accountability. So this were his major principles, his major values while he was in office. He ensured that members of the civil service acted in accordance with the guidelines, the principles that governed the civil service. So ensure there is no corruption, there is no nepotism, there is no indiscipline within the service. So military administrators also governed the state just like in the previous military era. The government had a no-nonsense reputation. It relied heavily on decrees and military tribunals to enforce discipline and punish offenders. So some of the major policies and events that were implemented during his regime includes the War Against Discipline, or WAI, which was launched in 1984. So the WAI program was a moral reorientation campaign. It's aimed at promoting punctuality and orderliness, sanitation and environmental cleanliness, respect for the national anthem, the national flag, and queue culture, patriotism, and ethical conduct. Remember that the principles that governed his regime was discipline. He was trying to instill discipline into the civil service and into the minds of Nigerian citizens. And so these were the things that he campaigned for within the Nigerian society. There were also several anti-corruption campaigns within the country. The regime arrested and jailed many politicians and officials from the Second Republic. Military tribunals handed down long prison sentences, some up to 100 years. And this earned the regime a reputation for zero tolerance for corruption. So because of all of these campaigns during that time, Buhari got a lot of backing from the people who believed that jailing these corrupt officials will bring about a change in the economic situation in the country. Now let's move on to the next slide. And that policy that was implemented during his regime was some economic measures. So Buhari's regime inherited a battered economy suffering from declining oil revenue, high inflation and unemployment, and mounting external debts. So when there is a decline in government revenue, there is usually inflation that follows because money no longer has value in such an economy. There is also an increasing unemployment rates because since money has no value, there will be no money to pay some of the laborers within some of these different sectors of the economy. There is also mounting external debt. The government has to borrow a lot of revenue in order to continue the day-to-day operations of the government. So some of the actions that Muhammadu Buhari took includes the rejection of IMF conditionalities, including the devaluation of the naira. Considering that they borrowed a lot of money from the International Monetary Fund, the International Monetary Fund offered some measures that can be implemented within the society to help to repay those debts. One of those measures includes the devaluation of the naira. But Buhari decided not to adopt this measure within the society. He decided to allow the naira to continue to work according to the rules of demand and supply within the Nigerian market. There was also the introduction of strict import restrictions and currency controls. We also launched austerity measures to cut government spending. Austerity measures means doing a lot of things to ensure that government spending is minimized so as to prevent wasting the little revenue that the country has. He also encouraged local production and self-reliance. When the local population can produce a lot of goods and services, they won't have to import a lot of them, and this will help to boost the naira. So these were the measures that Buhari adopted at that time. He also introduced some foreign policy measures. He adopted a Nigeria-first approach in dealing with external affairs. So he expelled thousands of illegal immigrants, mainly from West African countries. So while there was the oil boom in the Nigerian society, a lot of people from other West African countries were immigrating into Nigeria because they wanted to take advantage of the rising economic condition within the country. But considering all of the things that were going on at that time, Buhari decided to expel illegal immigrants out of the country in order to enable the jobs to the hands of Nigerians, the Nigerians who are unemployed within the society. So he also maintained a strong anti-apartheid stance and support for liberation movements. Some of the criticisms of Major General Muhammadu Buhari's regime is that despite its discipline and anti-corruption focus, the Buhari regime was widely criticized for authoritarianism, human rights abuses, and the Decree Number 4, which punished journalists for publishing false reports. So false reports means that any report that is not in favor of the government at that time. So when such reports are published, there is usually punishment for such journalists or for such media organization. Now let's move on to the next slide. Right now we're going to discuss the Palace Coup of 1984 that brought General Ibrahim Babangida to power. So on August 27, 1985, General Ibrahim Babangida, the Chief of Army Staff, staged a bloodless coup that removed Buhari from office. He cited the following as reasons for the coup. So he saw growing dissatisfaction among officers and civilians over repressive policies, economic hardships, and lack of political inclusion. There was also Buhari's refusal to adopt IMF reforms, which angered technocrats and international actors, and Idiagbo's growing power, which created discomfort within the military elites. So these were the reasons General Ibrahim Babangida staged a palace coup. So it is regarded as a palace coup because it was staged by one of Muhammadu Buhari's closest allies. While he was working for the government at that time, he decided to upstage the leader in power and take over. So this is why it is regarded as a palace coup. So what is the structure of General Ibrahim Babangida's government? First of all, he changed his title from head of state to president. So for the first time in Nigeria, a military head of state changed his title. So all the other military leaders of the previous regimes were always regarded as the head of states. But this time around, regard General Ibrahim Babangida as the military president of Nigeria. So he renamed the chief decision-making body in the country the Armed Forces Ruling Council. Earlier, it was regarded as the Supreme Military Council. So the chief decision-making body before Ibrahim Babangida was the Supreme Military Council, but he changed it to the Armed Forces Ruling Council during his regime. He was the chairman of this council. Admiral Augustus Aihomu was appointed Chief of General Staff, his second in command. So in 1989, the AFRC was restructured and renamed the Armed Forces Governing Council. State governments remained under the control of military governors appointed by the head of states. So he still continued with that pattern of appointing military governors to head each of the states within the federation. Now let's move on to the next slide. Right now, we're going to discuss the major policies and events during General Ibrahim Babangida's regime. One of them is the Structural Adjustment Program, or the SAP, which was introduced in 1986 in response to a crippling economic crisis and under pressure from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. So SAP was aimed at devaluing the naira, deregulating the economy, reducing import dependence, privatizing state-owned enterprises, removing subsidies, especially for fuel and food, and aimed to create a market-driven economy. So he devalued the naira just like the IMF had always wanted the Nigerian government to do. He also deregulated the economy. That means removing some of the regulations that were preventing industries from competing properly in the markets. So he also reduced import dependence by encouraging the production of goods and services within Nigeria. He privatized state-owned enterprise so that they can compete in the market and produce more revenue for the government. He removed subsidies as well. When you remove subsidies, the government no longer have to spend a lot of money trying to subsidize the amount of certain goods and services within the society. In that case, it was fuel and food. So you removed the subsidies for fuel and food at that time. He also aimed to create a market-driven economy, an economy that was driven by the laws of demand and supply, that was competing with one another in order to ensure that there is a growth in government revenue. So while SAP brought some macroeconomic restructuring, it also led to inflation, hardship, unemployment, and public anger, especially among the poor and middle class. So when all of these things happen, there's usually inflation at first, although people claim that eventually things begin to get better as government revenue continues to grow. But at that time, there was inflation, there was hardship, there was unemployment, and public anger within the Nigerian society. So he also introduced a political transition program. He wanted to transition power back to civilian rule. So Babangida initiated a lengthy transition program that lasted most of his tenure. He created the Political Bureau in 1986 to gather views on Nigeria's future governance. So this Political Bureau was responsible for gathering views about how to structure the Nigerian constitution to suit the needs of the Nigerian people. And let's move on to the next slide. Right now, other policies that were introduced was the establishment of the Constituent Assembly in 1988 that drafted the Third Republican Constitution. So following the recommendations of the Bureau, the Third Republican Constitution was drafted by this Constituent Assembly. So he also banned old political elites from contesting, a policy called political engineering. So Ibrahim Babangida is known for political engineering in the sense that he tried to create a political system of his own making, rather than leave it out for the people to decide on what political system that should be adopted within the society. So by doing that, he ensured that all political elites, those contestants for election in the previous republic, were not allowed to contest for election in this new republic. So he also created only two government-established political parties, the Social Democratic Party, or SDP, and the National Republican Convention, or the NRC. The reason for doing this is to ensure that political parties would no longer be divided along ethnic lines, but according to ideologies. So the SDP had that liberal democratic ideology, while the National Republican Convention had the Republican conservative ideology. So he wanted to ensure that people were divided along the lines of ideology and not ethnicity or religion. He also conducted the 1993 presidential election, which was eventually annulled. So the transition peaked with the June 12, 1993 presidential election, widely regarded as Nigeria's freest and fairest election. So Chief MK Abiola of the SDP was presumed to have won. However, Babangida annulled the election, and this sparked nationwide outrage and a political crisis. He also created new states and local governments during his regime. He created 11 new states in 1987 and 1991, increasing Nigerian states from 90 to 30. So he was responsible for creating 11 states out of the 36 states that we currently have in Nigeria. He also established key institutions such as the Federal Road Safety Corps, FRSC, the National Directorate of Employment, or NDE, and the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, or NDLEA. Now let's move on to the next slide. First, with growing protest and international condemnation following the annulment, Babangida stepped aside on August 26, 1993. Because of the outrage following the annulment of the election, he had no other option than to step aside and to hand over power to an unelected interim national government led by Chief Shonekon. So this interim national government was contested by a lot of political leaders at that time because they felt this leader was illegitimate. It was not elected by the people. So this transitional government was short-lived and it was overthrown by General Sani Abacha on November 17, 1993. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to discuss General Sani Abacha, who held office from 1993 to 1998. So on November 17, 1993, General Sani Abacha, then Secretary of Defense, staged a bloodless coup, forced Shonekon to resign and assumed full control as head of state and commander-in-chief. So he abolished all democratic structures in his government. He created the Provisional Ruling Council as the supreme governing body. So he replaced the Armed Forces Ruling Council with the Provisional Ruling Council. Provisional in the sense that it was not going to be in power for long. So that's the reason he named it the Provisional Ruling Council. He appointed military administrators to oversee the 30 states, which would later become 36 under his regime. And then he promised to return the country to civilian rule, but delayed action repeatedly. So his regime was highly centralized and authoritarian. So some of the policies and events that took place during his regime was, first of all, the economic reforms. He launched the Vision 2010 Committee to draft long-term development goals. So he introduced some stabilization measures such as the deregulation of petroleum pricing and the reorganization of the banking sector. So all of these things were designed to ensure that more revenue comes to the government. When you deregulate petroleum prices, the petroleum industry will be able to compete in the market and produce more revenue. Then Nigerian foreign reserves reportedly rose to $9.6 billion by 1998 because of some of these policies that he introduced at that time. However, economic benefits were limited by massive corruption and international isolation. So he's mostly known as the most corrupt leader that we've ever had in Nigeria. Although he generated a lot of revenue during his time, a lot of this revenue was then siphoned off into international accounts. Now let's move on to the next slide. All right, he also created new states and local governments during his regime. He created 6 new states in 1996, increasing the total from 30 to 36. He also increased local government areas to 774. Then he's also known for constitutional and political engineering, just like Babangida. So Abacha established the Constitutional Conference in 1994 to 1995 to propose a new constitution. He lifted the ban on political activities in 1996 and formed 5 political parties which all endorsed him to run for president in 1998, earning them the nickname the 5 fingers of a leper's hand. So you can see that there is political engineering in this sense because all 5 political parties nominated him to become the next civilian president. He was trying to transition to a civilian leader. So Abacha was widely believed to be preparing to transform into a civilian president in 1998. So he's also known for human rights abuses and repression. Abacha's first regime was internationally condemned for its brutal crackdown on opposition. Prominent politicians, journalists, and activists were jailed without trial, including Chief MK Abiola, the winner of the June 12 election. So this occurred in 1994, when after Sani Abacha took over, he decided to declare himself president. And because of that, he was arrested and jailed until the death of General Sani Abacha. Then General Olusegun Obasanjo was also jailed, as well as Shehu Musa Yaradua, who later died in prison. Shehu Musa Yaradua was the deputy head of state during Olusegun Obasanjo's regime, so he died in prison. And let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so General Sani Abacha is also known for the execution of Ken Saro-Wiwa and the Ogoni 9. In 1995, environmental activist Ken Saro-Wiwa and 8 other Ogoni leaders were executed by a military tribunal. This drew global outrage and led to Nigeria's suspension from the Commonwealth and sanctions from the United States, the European Union, and other international bodies. So Kentarowa was an activist who was trying to bring attention to what was going on in the Niger Delta, the pollution of the rivers and the sources of livelihoods of the Niger Delta people. And because of his activism, he was executed along with 8 other Ogoni leaders. This was not okay with so many of the international bodies like the European Union, even the United States and the Commonwealth. So he is also known for corruption and looting of public funds. Abacha is notoriously remembered for the massive looting of public funds. Estimates suggest that he stole over $5 billion stashed in offshore accounts across Europe and the Middle East. So recovery efforts since his death have returned billions in Abacha loot to Nigeria. So on June 8, 1998, Abacha died suddenly in Abuja under mysterious circumstances. He was claimed to have died of a heart attack, but rumors suggest poisoning or foul play. So his sudden death halted his plans to become a civilian leader. He was succeeded by General Abdulsalami Abubakar, who immediately began the process of democratic transition. So we've come to the end of this segment of the video lesson. I believe it was educative and insightful. If you would like to continue on this journey with us, please go down to the link in the description below. This takes you to my school website where you can subscribe for the government topic by topic video lesson. There you can continue on this journey with us. So we're going to move on to General Abdulsalami Abubakar and his process of transition to civilian rule. We're also going to discuss the achievements and weaknesses of military rule in Nigeria, and we're going to discuss the general process for return to civilian rule. There is a certain process that a country follows when it's transitioning back to civilian democratic rule. We're going to discuss all of that there. So I hope to see you there. I believe you're enjoying this content. If yes, please don't forget to hit the like button, click on the subscribe button, and lastly, tap on the notification bell to get informed as soon as we release the next videos.